My name is Sarah Chen Morrison, and I've spent the last 8 years building a reputation as one of Seattle's most sought-after pediatric nurses. I've held premature babies through their first breaths, comforted parents through the worst nights of their lives, and earned the trust of families who needed someone steady when their world was falling apart. I've been called dedicated, compassionate, unshakable. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I came home from delivering my own daughter to find my carefully prepared nursery destroyed, and my sister standing in the wreckage with paint-stained hands and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday in my life, except for the persistent ache in my lower back that had been building for 3 days. I was 38 weeks pregnant, officially on maternity leave from Seattle Children's Hospital, and spending my days in a strange mixture of nesting frenzy and restless anticipation. My husband Marcus had left early for his finance job downtown, kissing my forehead and reminding me to call if anything felt different. I remember standing in the doorway of our nursery, running my hand along the freshly painted sage green walls that had taken Marcus and me 3 weekends to get just right. The room was perfect in a way that felt almost sacred to me. We'd chosen every detail with the kind of careful attention you give to something precious and long-awaited. The white crib, with its delicate scrollwork, had been Marcus's grandmother's, restored by a craftsman in Ballard, who specialized in antique furniture. The rocking chairs sat by the window where morning light would stream in, positioned so I could look out at the sound while nursing. Above the changing table, we'd hung a mobile that Marcus's father, William Morrison, had commissioned from a local artist. It was subtle, elegant, nothing ostentatious, despite the fact that William could have bought anything in the world. Silver and white stars that caught the light and cast gentle shadows on the walls. William had surprised me with his restraint. For a man whose net worth appeared in Forbes magazine, he'd shown remarkable sensitivity about not overwhelming us with excessive gifts during the pregnancy. The bookshelf was already filled with classics and picture books, some from my own childhood, others carefully selected during weekend trips to Elliott Bay Book Company. I'd spent hours arranging and rearranging them, organizing by color, then by size, then by the order I imagined reading them to our daughter, Olivia. We'd chosen the name after weeks of discussion, written it in careful calligraphy on a small placard that sat on the dresser next to the lamp. Everything in that room represented months of planning, dreaming, and preparing. The soft yellow blanket my mother had knitted, folded precisely in the crib. The tiny clothes organized by size in the dresser drawers, tags still attached to the newborn outfits. The diaper-changing station stocked with everything we'd need for those first sleepless weeks. Even the temperature was perfect, maintained by a smart thermostat that Marcus had programmed to keep the room at exactly 72 degrees. My sister Jenna had been living with us for 6 months, ever since she'd lost her job at a marketing firm in Portland, and claimed she needed time to figure things out. At 26, she was 5 years younger than me, and had always possessed a restless energy that our parents had alternately called creative spirit and inability to focus. She'd moved through college majors like seasonal wardrobes, finally graduating with a degree in communications that she'd never really used for anything substantial. When she'd called me in tears last September, saying she'd been laid off and couldn't make rent, Marcus and I had discussed it and agreed she could stay in our guest room temporarily. We had the space, and family was family. She'd promised it would just be until she found something stable, maybe through the holidays at most. But the holidays had passed, then New Year's, then Valentine's Day. And Jenna's job search seemed to consist mainly of scrolling through LinkedIn while lounging on our couch. She'd been strange about the pregnancy from the beginning. Not hostile exactly, but distant in a way that felt deliberate. When we'd announced the news at Thanksgiving, she'd smiled and said congratulations, but there'd been something flat in her eyes. She'd avoid the nursery entirely for weeks, then suddenly appear in the doorway asking questions about paint colors or furniture placement that felt more like criticisms disguised as curiosity. "Don't you think sage green is a little safe?" She'd asked one afternoon while I was arranging books. "I mean, it's very suburban, Mom. Very predictable." I'd brushed off comments like that, attributing them to her own uncertainty about her life direction. Jenna had always been the artistic one, the one who'd wanted to move to New York and work in galleries or fashion. Settling into domestic life in Seattle probably felt suffocating to her. I understood that, or thought I did. What I didn't understand was the way she'd started making little comments about Marcus's family wealth. William Morrison wasn't just successful, he was genuinely wealthy, in the way that old Seattle money could be. His grandfather had been one of the early investors in Boeing, and William had built on that foundation with smart tech investments in the 90s and early 2000s. But Marcus lived modestly, worked his regular job, and we'd bought our house with our own savings and a conventional mortgage. "Must be nice," Jenna had said one evening when a delivery truck brought the restored crib, "having a father-in-law who can just snap his fingers and make things appear." "He didn't pay for the crib," I'd corrected her. "We saved for that." "Sure," she'd replied, but her tone suggested she didn't believe me. The truth was that William had been respectful about boundaries from the day Marcus and I got engaged. He'd offered to help with the wedding, but when we'd said we wanted to pay for it ourselves, he'd simply nodded and asked what he could do instead. He ended up giving a beautiful toast at the reception and nothing more. When we'd bought the house, he'd offered to help with the down payment, but again, when we'd declined, he'd respected our choice without pushing. His approach to the pregnancy had been similarly thoughtful. He was excited about becoming a grandfather, but he didn't intrude. He'd ask how I was feeling when we saw him for Sunday dinners, bring me ginger tea when the morning sickness was bad, and occasionally share stories about Marcus as a baby that made us all laugh. The mobile had been his only unsolicited gift, and even that he'd presented carefully, saying he'd commissioned it months ago, but if we didn't like it or had already chosen something else, he'd completely understand. I appreciated his restraint, especially given how overwhelming new pregnancy could feel when everyone had opinions about everything from names to nursery themes to feeding philosophies. William simply offered support and stepped back, which made his presence in our lives feel like a gift rather than an intrusion. But Jenna seemed to interpret his respectful distance as something calculated, as if he were holding back resources that should rightfully be flowing in our direction. She'd make comments about how typical it was for wealthy people to be stingy with their own family, or wonder aloud why we were struggling to buy baby gear when Marcus's father could, quote, buy the entire store without noticing. These conversations always left me feeling defensive and confused. We weren't struggling, we'd planned for this pregnancy, saved money, prepared thoughtfully. The idea that we were somehow victims of William's selfishness felt not just wrong, but almost insulting to the choices Marcus and I had made about how we wanted to build our life together. That Tuesday morning in March, standing in the perfectly arranged nursery, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or family dynamics, or Jenna's restless energy downstairs. This room represented something Marcus and I had built together, chosen together, dreamed into reality together. In a few weeks, our daughter would sleep in that crib, and I would sit in that rocking chair feeding her, and none of the external complications would matter. The first contraction hit while I was adjusting the angle of a picture frame on the dresser. It wasn't painful exactly, just a tightening sensation across my belly that made me pause and breathe deeply. I'd been having Braxton Hicks contractions for weeks, so I didn't think much of it initially. But when another one came 20 minutes later, stronger and more focused, I started paying attention. By noon, they were coming every 15 minutes. By 2 o'clock, every 10. I called Marcus at work, and he said he'd leave immediately. I called my doctor's office, and the nurse said to head to the hospital when the contractions were 5 minutes apart, or when I felt ready. I wasn't quite there yet, but the intensity was building in a way that felt different from anything I'd experienced before. Jenna was in the living room when I came downstairs with my hospital bag, watching something on Netflix with the volume turned up too loud. She glanced at me, took in the bag and my obvious discomfort, and paused her show. "Is it time?" she asked. "Getting close," I said. "Marcus is on his way home, and then we'll head to the hospital." Quote. She stood up, and for a moment I thought she might offer to help or say something supportive. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the street. "Crazy that after today, everything changes," she said without turning around. "Your whole life. Just completely different." There was something in her voice that made me study her profile. She looked tense, almost angry, though I couldn't imagine why. "That's kind of the point," I said gently. "We've been preparing for everything to change." She nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah. I'm sure it'll all work out perfectly for you. It always does." Before I could ask what she meant by that, another contraction gripped me, stronger than any of the previous ones. I had to lean against the doorframe and breathe through it, counting the seconds until it passed. When I looked up, Jenna was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "You should probably get going," she said. Marcus arrived home 20 minutes later, his tie loosened and his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled from rushing. He took one look at me gripping the kitchen counter through another contraction, and immediately switched into the calm, organized mode that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Within minutes, he had our bags in the car, the hospital pre-registered on his phone, and a playlist of calming music queued up for the drive. "Jenna, we're heading out," he called toward the living room as he helped me into the passenger seat. "We'll call you when the baby arrives." She appeared at the front door, hands shoved deep in her sweatshirt pockets, and gave us a wave that seemed more like a dismissal than a goodbye. There was still something off about her expression, something I couldn't shake even as another contraction demanded my full attention. The drive to Swedish Medical Center took 45 minutes in Tuesday afternoon traffic. Marcus held my hand at red lights and talked me through breathing exercises he'd learned in our birthing class. The contractions were coming every 7 minutes now, lasting longer and hitting harder. By the time we reached the hospital, I was ready to admit that this was really happening. Labor progressed faster than anyone expected. The nurses said first babies usually took their time, but Olivia apparently had other plans. Within 6 hours, I was fully dilated and ready to push. Marcus never left my side, feeding me ice chips and reminding me to breathe when the pain became overwhelming. My doctor, Dr. Martinez, arrived just as things intensified, calm and confident in the way that made me trust her completely. At 11:47 p.m., after 23 minutes of pushing that felt like hours, Olivia Chen Morrison entered the world. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else in the universe became background noise. She was warm and slippery and absolutely perfect, and when she opened her eyes and looked at me, I understood for the first time what people meant when they talked about instant, overwhelming love. Marcus cried. I'd never seen him cry before, not even at our wedding, but he stood there with tears streaming down his face, touching her tiny fingers and whispering her name like a prayer. When the nurses cleaned her up and handed her to him, he held her like she was made of glass, staring at her face with wonder. "She's beautiful," he kept saying. "Sarah, she's so beautiful." I couldn't stop looking at her either. After months of imagining what she might look like, seeing her actual face felt like meeting someone I'd known forever, but was encountering for the first time. She had Marcus's chin and what looked like my mother's nose, but her expression was entirely her own, alert and curious even in her first hours. We stayed in the delivery room for 2 hours, just the three of us, learning how to be a family. The nurses checked on us periodically, but mostly they left us alone to marvel at what we'd created. Olivia nursed immediately, latching on like she'd been planning this moment for months. Every little sound she made, every movement, felt like a miracle. Around 2 a.m., they moved us to a recovery room where we could rest before going home the next day. Marcus called his father from the hallway, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake other patients. I could hear him through the door, his excitement bubbling over as he described every detail of Olivia's birth. William's response was warm but measured, congratulating us and asking when might be appropriate to visit. "Tomorrow evening, maybe?" Marcus suggested. "Once we're home and settled." I was drifting in and out of sleep, exhausted but too exhilarated to fully relax, when Marcus returned to sit beside the bed. Olivia was sleeping in the bassinet next to me, making the tiny snuffling sounds that newborns make. "My dad is over the moon," Marcus said softly. "He's already talking about college funds and teaching her to sail." I smiled, imagining William's controlled excitement. He'd probably already started a mental list of grandfather activities, organized by Olivia's developmental stages. The thought was comforting in a way that surprised me. After months of feeling overwhelmed by the idea of becoming parents, It was reassuring to know she'd have a grandfather who was genuinely thrilled about her existence. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What about Jenna? I asked. Did you call her? Marcus shook his head. I texted her a photo and said we'd be home tomorrow afternoon. She didn't respond, but it's late. She's probably asleep. Something about that bothered me, though I couldn't articulate why. Jenna had been living in our house for months, witnessing every stage of my pregnancy, helping us prepare for this moment whether she wanted to or not. Her silence felt deliberate in a way that didn't sit right, but I was too tired and too happy to dwell on it. The next morning brought a parade of nurses checking vital signs, a pediatrician examining Olivia, and a lactation consultant helping me navigate the mysteries of breastfeeding. Everything looked good. Olivia was healthy, I was recovering well, and Dr. Martinez cleared us to go home after lunch. Marcus went to get the car while I finished the discharge paperwork. Carrying Olivia out of the hospital felt momentous, like crossing a threshold into a completely different version of our lives. She slept through the entire car ride home, unbothered by the transition from hospital to car seat to the world outside. Our neighborhood looked exactly the same as when we'd left 24 hours earlier, but I felt like we were returning as completely different people. The house came into view, and I noticed Jenna's car wasn't in the driveway. Probably out job hunting, I thought, or maybe she'd gone to give us space for our first day home. Marcus parked in the garage and helped me out carefully. I was sore and moving slowly, still adjusting to my post-pregnancy body. He carried Olivia in her car seat, and I followed behind with the diaper bag, keys ready to unlock the front door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different, charged with a tension that hadn't been there when we left. There was a smell, too, something sharp and chemical that made my nose wrinkle. "Do you smell that?" I asked Marcus. He paused, shifting Olivia's car seat to his other hand, and sniffed. "Paint?" We looked at each other, confusion replacing the joy of homecoming. Why would anything smell like paint? We hadn't planned any painting projects, and Jenna certainly hadn't mentioned doing anything to the house while we were gone. I walked toward the stairs, following the smell, and that's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in our quiet house. Music, playing from somewhere upstairs. Not loud, but audible enough to notice. The kind of playlist you might put on while doing manual labor. "Jenna?" I called out. No response. Marcus set down the car seat and followed me up the stairs. The smell of paint grew stronger with each step, and the music became clearer. It was coming from the direction of the nursery. I reached the hallway and saw that the nursery door was closed. Light was visible underneath it, and the music was definitely coming from inside. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't have said why. There was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe Jenna had decided to surprise us by touching up the paint while we were gone, though that seemed unlike her. I reached for the doorknob, and Marcus's hand caught my wrist. "Wait," he said quietly. There was something in his voice that made me look at him. His expression had gone very still, very alert, the same look he got when he was analyzing financial reports and found numbers that didn't add up. "Let me go first," he said. But I was already turning the knob, already pushing the door open, already stepping into what had been our perfect nursery 36 hours ago. The devastation was so complete that for a moment my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The sage green walls were covered in black paint, dripping streaks that ran from ceiling to floor like tears. The beautiful mobile lay shattered on the ground, its silver stars bent and scattered. The rocking chair had been overturned, one of its legs snapped clean off. Books were torn apart, their pages scattered across the floor like confetti. The crib mattress had been slashed, stuffing pulled out and spread around the room. Every single piece of clothing had been removed from the dresser and thrown into a pile in the center of the room, then doused with what looked like black paint. The changing table was overturned, diapers and wipes and lotions crushed underneath. The carefully organized bookshelf lay on its side, its contents destroyed. Even the temperature control system had been vandalized, its digital display smashed. And in the middle of it all, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a paintbrush in her hand and black streaks across her face, was Jenna. She looked up at us with a smile that was entirely too bright, entirely too satisfied. "Welcome home," she said. I redecorated. The silence that followed Jenna's casual announcement stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. I stood frozen in the doorway, my post-labor body already aching, trying to reconcile the sister I thought I knew with the person sitting calmly in the ruins of my daughter's nursery. Marcus stepped protectively in front of me, his financial analyst brain immediately shifting into damage assessment mode. "What did you do?" His voice was deadly quiet, the kind of controlled anger I'd never heard from him before. Jenna stood up slowly, brushing paint flecks off her jeans like she'd just finished a casual art project. "I improved it," she said, gesturing around the destroyed room. "It was so boring before, so predictable, so perfectly suburban and safe." I found my voice, though it came out shaky. "Jenna, this is insane. Why would you?" "Why would I what?" she interrupted, her bright smile never wavering. "Why would I finally do something honest in this house? Why would I stop pretending that everything about your perfect little life isn't completely handed to you?" Marcus pulled out his phone, and I could see him opening the camera app. "I'm documenting this," he said, taking photos of the destruction from multiple angles. "Every single detail." Jenna laughed, a sound that was somehow worse than screaming would have been. "Go ahead, take pictures, send them to Daddy Morrison. See if he can buy you a new nursery as easily as he bought you this whole life." "William didn't buy us anything," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how futile they were. Jenna had constructed a reality in her head that had nothing to do with facts. "Right," she said, kicking at a torn page from one of the children's books. "You paid for this house with your nurse salary and Marcus's little finance job. You saved up for all this baby stuff while supporting me for months. You're just so responsible and independent." Marcus was methodically photographing everything while talking quietly into his phone. I caught fragments of his conversation. "Yes, it's an emergency. Deliberate destruction of property. We need someone here immediately." "Who are you calling?" Jenna asked, her casual demeanor slipping slightly. "The police," Marcus said without looking up from his documentation. "And our insurance company. And a locksmith." That last word seemed to hit Jenna differently. "A locksmith? You're changing the locks?" "You destroyed our daughter's nursery while we were in the hospital having her," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Did you think we'd invite you to stay for dinner?" For the first time since we'd entered the room, Jenna's composed mask cracked. "You can't just kick me out. I live here. I have nowhere else to go." "You should have thought about that before you decided to vandalize our home," Marcus said, still taking photos. He'd moved on to documenting the paint cans she'd used, which I now noticed were lined up neatly against one wall, like she'd planned this destruction, with the same care we'd used to plan the nursery's creation. I stepped carefully into the room, avoiding the worst of the debris, and picked up one of the torn book pages. It was from Goodnight Moon, a book my mother had read to me as a child. The page showed the quiet old lady whispering, "Hush," and seeing it ripped and paint splattered felt like a physical blow. "How long did this take you?" I asked quietly. Jenna shrugged. "Most of yesterday. I started right after you left for the hospital." The calculated nature of that timing hit me like another contraction. While I'd been in labor, while Marcus had been holding my hand and we'd been bringing our daughter into the world, Jenna had been systematically destroying everything we'd prepared for her arrival. "You planned this," I said, and it wasn't a question. "I've been planning this for months," she admitted, and there was something almost proud in her voice. "Watching you two play house. Watching you pretend you're not living off Morrison money. Watching you get everything handed to you while I'm stuck in your guest room like some charity case." Marcus looked up from his phone. "The police are on their way. So is my father." "You called William?" I asked. "He's our emergency contact for the security system," Marcus explained. "And given the extent of the damage, we're going to need his lawyers." Jenna's face went pale at the word, lawyers. "Lawyers? For what?" "Criminal destruction of property," Marcus said calmly. "Breaking and entering, since you no longer have permission to be in this house. Possibly harassment, depending on what else we find." I was still processing the scope of what she'd done. The mobile that William had commissioned wasn't just broken. It had been deliberately shattered, pieces ground into the floor like she'd stepped on them repeatedly. The antique crib that had been Marcus's grandmother's was gouged with what looked like knife marks. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a systematic attack on everything that represented family history and continuity. What else? I asked. Marcus, what did you mean? What else do we find? He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something. I set up security notifications when we installed the new system last month. Motion detectors, entry alerts. I wanted to check the logs while we were gone. Jenna shifted uncomfortably. So you've been coming into this room every day for the past 2 weeks, Marcus said, reading from his screen. Sometimes multiple times a day. What were you doing in here? The question hung in the air. I thought back to the past 2 weeks, trying to remember if I'd noticed anything out of place in the nursery. A few times, I'd found the books rearranged slightly, or the mobile turned to a different angle, but I'd attributed it to air currents or my own pregnancy brain making me forget small adjustments I'd made. Just looking, Jenna said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Marcus was still scrolling through the security logs. 47 separate entries into this room over 14 days, some of them at 3 a.m. Jenna, what were you doing? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the physical temperature. The idea of Jenna creeping into the nursery at night, touching things, planning this destruction while Marcus and I slept down the hall, made my skin crawl. I was trying to understand, she said, and for the first time she sounded genuinely emotional instead of performatively casual. Trying to figure out what made you so special that you get everything while I get nothing. We don't get everything, I said, but even as I spoke, I realized how that must sound to someone who'd been unemployed for months, living in our guest room, watching us prepare for a baby she clearly resented. You have a house, she said, her voice rising. You have careers. You have a husband whose father could solve any problem you ever have with a single phone call. You have a baby who's going to grow up with every advantage in the world. And I have nothing. You have family, I said. You had a place to stay, people who cared about you, time to figure out what you wanted to do next. You had support. I had charity, she spat. I had you two feeling sorry for me and letting me live in your perfect house like some kind of pet project. The sound of sirens was getting closer. Marcus went to the window and looked down at the street. Police are here. My father's car is right behind them. Jenna looked panicked now, her earlier bravado completely gone. Sarah, please, you don't have to do this. We can work something out. I'll clean it up. I'll replace everything. With what money? Marcus asked bluntly. She didn't have an answer for that, and the reality of her situation seemed to hit her all at once. No job, no savings, no place to go, and now potentially facing criminal charges for what she'd done to our home. The doorbell rang downstairs. Marcus looked at me, a question in his eyes. Go let them in, I said. I'll stay here with her. He hesitated. Are you sure? I nodded, though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The sister I thought I knew had revealed herself to be someone completely different, someone capable of cruelty I wouldn't have believed possible. As Marcus's footsteps disappeared down the stairs, Jenna and I stood in the wreckage of what was supposed to be our daughter's first room. The silence between us was heavy with years of resentment I'd never recognized, grievances I'd never understood. I'm sorry, she said quietly, and for a moment she sounded like the little sister I remembered from childhood. But then I looked around at the deliberate devastation, at the evidence of planning and malice, at the timing that had ensured maximum emotional impact, and I realized that sorry wasn't going to be enough. The sound of voices was coming up the stairs now, official voices asking questions and requesting information. The real investigation was about to begin. The sound of multiple voices filled our house as Marcus led what seemed like half of Seattle's emergency services up to the nursery. 2 police officers, a detective, and behind them, William Morrison, impeccably dressed even at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, carrying a leather briefcase that I somehow knew contained the kind of legal firepower most people never encountered. Detective Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and graying hair, took one look at the destruction and let out a low whistle. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to walk me through exactly what happened here. I started from the beginning, my voice steadier than I felt. Labor, hospital, coming home to find this. As I spoke, one of the officers was taking additional photographs while the other collected the paint cans and what looked like the tools Jenna had used. a hammer, kitchen knives from our own drawer, a box cutter that I recognized from our home office. And the person responsible is still in the house? Detective Rodriguez asked. My sister, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. She's been living with us for 6 months. Jenna sat in the corner of the destroyed room, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She looked small and frightened, younger than her 26 years, but I found I couldn't summon any sympathy. Not when I was standing in the ruins of everything we'd prepared for our daughter. William approached me carefully, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine anger. Sarah, how are you feeling? Should you be standing this long after? I'm fine, I said quickly, though I wasn't. My body ached, my emotions were careening between rage and heartbreak, and I was beginning to understand that this situation was far more complex than simple vandalism. Mr. Morrison, Detective Rodriguez said, recognizing him, I understand you're here in a legal capacity? Among other things, William replied, opening his briefcase. I've brought documentation of the property values involved, insurance information, and preliminary legal assessments. But primarily, I'm here as a grandfather who's horrified that anyone would do this to a newborn's nursery. Something in his tone made Jenna look up sharply. I didn't hurt the baby. I would never hurt a baby. You hurt her parents, William said, his voice carrying a steel I'd never heard before. You attacked their home, their sense of security, their ability to bring their daughter into a safe environment. You may not have physically harmed Olivia, but you've certainly harmed her family. Detective Rodriguez was examining the security system data that Marcus had pulled up on his phone. 47 entries over 2 weeks, she said. That shows premeditation. This wasn't a moment of anger or impulse. I was just thinking, Jenna said desperately, just trying to figure things out. Figure out what? I asked, and I genuinely wanted to know. What could you possibly have been thinking about that required you to sneak into our nursery 47 times? Jenna's composure finally cracked completely. I was trying to understand why you get to have everything. Why everything comes so easy for you, while I can't even find a job, can't even afford my own apartment, can't even... Easy? The word came out sharper than I intended. You think this has been easy? Quote. But before she could answer, Detective Rodriguez held up a hand. I need to understand the timeline here. Ms. Chen, Jenna said quietly. Jenna Chen. Ms. Chen, you've been living here for 6 months. Rent-free, I assume? Jenna nodded. And during that time, what efforts have you made to find employment or alternative housing? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Jenna mumbled, I've been looking. Marcus, who had been quietly coordinating with the other officer, looked up from his phone. Detective, I can provide you with our internet usage logs if needed. They'll show exactly how much time was spent on job search websites versus other activities. The implied threat was clear, and Jenna's face flushed red. That's not fair. You can't just... Can't what? William's voice cut through her protest. Can't document the truth. Can't provide evidence of how you spent your time while living rent-free in their home. One of the officers had been examining the damaged crib more closely. Ma'am, this piece looks like it might be an antique. Do you know its value? I looked at Marcus, who looked at William. It was my grandmother's, Marcus said, restored by a specialist. The insurance appraisal from last year valued it at $12,000. Jenna's eyes went wide. $12,000? For a crib? It's a 100-year-old piece, William explained, his tone educational but firm. Hand-carved, historically significant to our family. Irreplaceable. Detective Rodriguez was making notes. So we're looking at significant property damage, not just vandalism. The antique furniture, the commissioned mobile, the electronic systems. This is easily going to cross the felony threshold. Felony? Jenna's voice went up an octave. I didn't know it was worth that much. I thought it was just regular furniture. You thought wrong, William said. But more importantly, the value of the items isn't what makes this unconscionable. It's the timing, the planning, the violation of trust. I found myself staring at Jenna, really looking at her, for what felt like the first time in months. The sister I'd been worried about, the one I'd thought was struggling with depression and uncertainty, was someone I didn't recognize at all. When did you decide to do this? I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Detective Rodriguez stepped closer. Miss Chen, it would be in your best interest to be honest about your motivations and timeline. Quote, I don't know, Jenna said, but she was lying. I could tell by the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. The security logs show your first late-night entry was 3 weeks ago, Marcus said, reading from his phone, right after we finished setting up the nursery. What happened that night? I remembered that night. We'd spent the evening arranging everything perfectly, stepping back to admire our work, taking pictures to send to our parents. We'd been so happy, so excited. After months of preparation, seeing it all come together had felt like a dream. You were so proud, Jenna said suddenly, her voice bitter. Both of you, standing there taking pictures like you'd created something amazing instead of just buying expensive things and arranging them in a room. We didn't just buy things, I said. We planned, we saved, we chose every item carefully. With his father's money, Jenna interrupted, gesturing at William. Don't pretend this isn't all funded by Morrison Wealth. William stepped forward, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of cold assessment. Miss Chen, he said, his voice perfectly controlled, I'd like you to walk me through exactly what financial support you believe I've provided to Marcus and Sarah. Jenna blinked, clearly not expecting the direct challenge. The house, obviously. The baby stuff. Everything. The house was purchased with a conventional mortgage based on their combined income, William said. I have the loan documents if you'd like to see them. The nursery furniture was purchased with their savings over several months. I can provide the receipts and bank statements. But the mobile was a gift from a grandfather to his future granddaughter, one item out of dozens. Detective Rodriguez was watching this exchange with interest. Ms. Chen, it sounds like your assumptions about your sister's finances may have been incorrect. They still have advantages, Jenna said desperately. They still have backup, security, options that I don't have. They have those things because they make different choices, William said. Marcus works 60-hour weeks. Sarah spent years in school and building her career. They budget, they plan, they save. What choices have you made? The question hung in the air like an accusation. And looking at Jenna's face, I realized she didn't have an answer because she'd never really thought about it that way. She'd constructed a narrative where she was the victim of other people's advantages rather than the author of her own choices. I want a lawyer, Jenna said suddenly. Detective Rodriguez nodded. That's your right, but I need to inform you that you're under arrest for criminal destruction of property, breaking and entering, and harassment. As the officer read Jenna her rights, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but a kind of clarity. This wasn't about money or advantages or family dynamics. This was about someone who had decided that other people's happiness was a personal affront and who had acted on that belief in the most cruel way possible. Marcus moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. Are you okay? I looked around the destroyed nursery one more time, then down at the wedding ring on my finger, then toward the stairs where I knew our daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat, unaware that the room we'd prepared for her with such love had been turned into a crime scene. I will be, I said, and for the first time since we'd walked through our front door I believed it. The house felt eerily quiet after the police left with Jenna in handcuffs. The forensics team had finished collecting evidence, the detective had completed her initial report, and suddenly, it was just Marcus, William, and me standing in our living room with Olivia sleeping peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her world had been turned upside down before she'd even had a chance to see it. William was the first to break the silence. We need to discuss next steps, he said, setting his briefcase on our coffee table with the kind of precision that suggested he'd already thought through multiple scenarios. The criminal charges are just the beginning. Marcus sank into the armchair, running his hands through his hair. I can't believe she actually got arrested. Part of me thought they'd just tell her to clean it up and move out. The property damage alone exceeds $15,000, Williams said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a yellow legal pad covered in neat handwriting. That's not including the emotional distress, the violation of your security system, or the fact that she deliberately timed this to coincide with Olivia's birth. I was still processing the fact that my sister was sitting in a jail cell somewhere, probably still believing she'd been wronged by circumstances beyond her control. The disconnect between her actions and her self-perception was so vast that I wondered if I'd ever really known her at all. "What kind of next steps?" I asked, settling carefully on the couch next to Olivia's car seat. William flipped to a new page in his pad. "Legally, criminally, and practically. The prosecutor's office will handle the criminal case, but we need to think about civil recovery, insurance claims, and protecting yourselves from future incidents." "Future incidents?" Marcus looked up sharply. "Marcus, your sister-in-law just demonstrated that she's capable of elaborate, premeditated revenge. She spent weeks planning this attack. Do you really think she's going to accept responsibility and move on quietly?" The question sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on the immediate shock of what Jenna had done that I hadn't considered what might come next. If she was willing to destroy our nursery while I was in labor, what else might she be willing to do? "She doesn't have anywhere to go," I said. "No money, no job, no other family she's close to." "Which makes her more dangerous, not less," William replied. "Desperate people make desperate choices. And she's already shown she blames you for her circumstances, rather than taking responsibility for her own decisions." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "It's from her, from jail." "What does it say?" William asked. Marcus read aloud, "This is all a misunderstanding. I just need to explain everything to Sarah. Please don't let them press charges. I have nowhere else to go." William made a note on his pad. "Save that message. It's evidence of continued contact despite the arrest, and it shows she's still not acknowledging what she actually did." I felt a familiar tug of guilt, the same feeling that had made me let Jenna move in 6 months ago when she'd called crying about losing her job. Even after everything she'd done, part of me still felt responsible for her well-being. "She's right about not having anywhere to go," I said quietly. William looked at me with something that might have been disappointment. "Sarah, that's not your problem to solve anymore. She's my sister. She's a criminal who targeted your family during one of the most vulnerable moments of your lives," William said firmly. "The fact that you share DNA doesn't obligate you to enable her destructive behavior." Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another text from Jenna. "Please call me. I can explain everything. You know I would never hurt Olivia. This is all just a big mistake." "She's going to keep contacting us," Marcus said, showing us the message. William made another note. "We'll get a restraining order filed tomorrow morning. No contact, no physical proximity, no third-party communication through other family members." The idea of getting a restraining order against my own sister felt surreal, but I was beginning to understand that the Jenna I thought I knew, the one who might deserve sympathy and second chances, had never really existed. "What about the insurance?" I asked, trying to focus on practical matters. "I've already contacted your carrier," William said. "They'll send an adjuster tomorrow to assess the damage. Based on the police report and the evidence we've documented, there shouldn't be any issues with coverage." "And replacing everything?" Marcus asked. William's expression softened slightly. "That's where I'd like to help, if you'll let me." I tensed, remembering Jenna's accusations about Morrison money solving all our problems. "Not financially," William continued, apparently reading my reaction. "But I have connections with restoration specialists, artisans, security companies, people who can help you rebuild this properly, safely, and quickly." That felt different from what Jenna had accused us of accepting. Not charity, but expertise and connections offered by someone who genuinely cared about our well-being. "The nursery can be restored," William continued, "but right now Olivia needs a safe place to sleep tonight." I looked down at our daughter, still peaceful in her car seat. She'd need to be fed soon, changed, held. All the normal things that new parents do, except we'd be doing them while police tape blocked access to the room we'd prepared for her. "The guest room," Marcus said. "We can set up a temporary nursery there." "Actually," William said, "I have a better suggestion. Why don't you both come stay at my house for a few weeks, while the repairs are being done and while we sort out the legal situation?" I started to shake my head automatically, but Marcus spoke first. "That might not be a bad idea, Sarah. We don't know if Jenna will make bail. We don't know who else might be helping her, or supporting her version of events." "Who else would help her?" I asked. William and Marcus exchanged a look that suggested they'd thought of something I hadn't. Your parents, William said gently. Have you called them yet? I hadn't. In all the chaos of the police and the arrest and the evidence collection, I hadn't even thought about calling our parents. They were going to hear about their granddaughter's birth and their daughter's arrest in the same conversation. They'll want to help her, I said, understanding immediately why William and Marcus were concerned. They'll want to bail her out, get her a lawyer, find her somewhere to stay. And they'll pressure you to forgive her, to not press charges, to handle this as a family matter, Marcus added. I could already imagine the conversations. Our mother crying, our father explaining how Jenna had always been sensitive, how she'd been struggling lately, how family should stick together no matter what. The same dynamics that had allowed Jenna to manipulate situations for years. I need to call them, I said, pulling out my phone. Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? William asked. I looked around our living room, at the evidence collection kit the police had left behind, at the legal documents William had spread across our coffee table, at my newborn daughter who should have been sleeping in a beautiful nursery instead of a car seat in a house that no longer felt safe. I'm not sure I have a choice, I said. My mother answered on the second ring. Sarah, how did everything go? Is the baby here? We've been waiting for you to call. I took a deep breath. Mom, Olivia was born last night. She's healthy and beautiful, and we're all fine. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. I can't wait to meet her. How are you feeling? Was the delivery okay? The delivery was perfect, I said, and it had been. That felt like it had happened weeks ago, instead of less than 24 hours. But Mom, something else happened. Something with Jenna. The pause on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. What about Jenna? My mother asked finally, her voice cautious in a way that suggested she already knew this wasn't going to be good news. She destroyed the nursery while we were at the hospital. The police arrested her about an hour ago. Another long pause. Destroyed how? My father's voice came on the line. They'd switched to speakerphone. Completely destroyed, paint everywhere, furniture broken, everything ruined. It was deliberate, planned. She spent weeks preparing for it. Quote, There has to be some explanation, my mother said immediately. Jenna wouldn't do something like that without a reason. What did you do to upset her? And there it was. The question I'd been dreading. The one that made me responsible for my sister's choices. Turned her criminal behavior into my failure to manage her emotions properly. Marcus was watching my face, and William was taking notes again, probably documenting this conversation for future legal reference. I didn't do anything to upset her, Mom, I said as calmly as I could. She committed a felony because she resented the life Marcus and I have built together. A felony? Sarah, don't you think you're being a little dramatic? That's when I knew that everything William had predicted was going to come true. My parents were going to minimize, excuse, and ultimately blame me for what Jenna had done. And I was going to have to choose between enabling that dynamic or protecting my own family. I looked at Olivia, still sleeping peacefully, trusting that the adults in her life would keep her safe and create a stable world for her to grow up in. The choice was easier than I'd expected. I ended the call with my parents without saying goodbye. Just pressed the red button and set my phone face down on the coffee table, where it immediately started buzzing with incoming calls that I had no intention of answering. How bad was it? Marcus asked quietly. Exactly what you predicted, I said, looking at William. They want to know what I did to upset her. They think I'm being dramatic about felony charges. They're already talking about bailing her out and getting her help instead of consequences. William nodded grimly. That's the pattern that enabled this behavior in the first place. And it's why we need to act decisively now, before they can interfere with the legal process. Over the next 3 weeks, living in William's guest wing with Olivia, I watched my sister's consequences unfold with a mixture of relief and sadness. The prosecutor's office moved quickly, partly because the evidence was overwhelming, and partly because William's legal team had provided such thorough documentation that there was no ambiguity about what had happened. Jenna pled guilty to criminal destruction of property and breaking and entering. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, full restitution for the damages, and mandatory counseling. My parents hired a lawyer who tried to negotiate a plea deal, that would involve only community service and therapy. But the financial value of the destroyed items made that impossible. The restraining order was granted immediately. No contact with me, Marcus, or Olivia for 2 years, extendable if there were any violations. No communication through third parties. No social media contact. No physical proximity to our home or workplaces. My parents violated the no third-party communication rule within a week, calling to tell me that Jenna was devastated, that jail was too harsh, that I was destroying our family by pressing charges. I documented every call and forwarded the information to William's lawyers, who filed additional motions to strengthen the restraining order. It's not about punishment, I told Marcus one evening as we fed Olivia in William's kitchen. It's about boundaries. For the first time in her life, Jenna is experiencing actual consequences for her choices, instead of having other people absorb the impact. The restoration of our nursery took 2 months. William connected us with artisans who specialized in antique furniture repair, and while Marcus's grandmother's crib couldn't be completely restored to its original condition, they managed to repair it in a way that honored its history while making it structurally sound. The scars were still visible if you looked closely, but somehow that felt appropriate. Beautiful things can survive damage and still be beautiful. The new mobile was different from the original. We decided that trying to recreate exactly what had been destroyed would feel haunting rather than healing. Instead, we chose something that represented moving forward. Wooden birds in flight, carved by a local artist, painted in soft blues and greens that caught the natural light from the window. When we finally brought Olivia home to her restored nursery, she was 3 months old, alert and curious about her surroundings. I sat in the rocking chair, the same one, refinished and repaired, and nursed her, while Marcus read aloud from one of the new books we'd chosen to replace the ones that had been destroyed. The room felt different than it had before. Not worse, exactly, but deeper somehow. It held the story of what we'd overcome, as well as the dreams we'd started with. Every repaired surface, every replaced item, every carefully chosen detail represented our decision to rebuild, rather than abandon what was important to us. My parents made one final attempt to reconcile the family 6 months after Jenna's sentencing. They invited us to a healing dinner, where Jenna would apologize and we could all move forward together. I declined politely but firmly, explaining that forgiveness didn't require putting ourselves back in harm's way. She's learned her lesson, my mother insisted, during what would be our last phone conversation about the subject. She knows what she did was wrong. She just wants her sister back. What she wants, I replied, is to return to a dynamic where her behavior doesn't have lasting consequences. That's not healing. That's enabling. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court for an amount that covered our insurance deductible, temporary housing costs, and the emotional distress of having our home violated during such a vulnerable time. Jenna's portion of the settlement would be paid through garnished wages once she found employment, which her probation officer was helping her secure. Marcus and I used part of the settlement money to upgrade our home security system and to establish a college fund for Olivia. We also made a donation to a local family shelter, because we'd learned that safe housing was a privilege not everyone could take for granted. William never asked us to pay him back for the legal fees or the expertise he'd provided. When I tried to bring it up, he waved off the conversation. That's what family does, he said simply. Real family protects each other. I understood then that family wasn't just about blood relations or shared history. It was about people who showed up when you needed them, who helped you rebuild when things fell apart, who supported your boundaries instead of pressuring you to abandon them. 2 years later, when the restraining order expired, Jenna sent a letter through her lawyer requesting a meeting. She'd completed her jail sentence, finished her probation, and wanted to, quote, rebuild our relationship. The letter included what appeared to be a genuine apology, acknowledging the planning and malice involved in her actions, taking full responsibility for her choices, and expressing understanding of why consequences had been necessary. Marcus and I discussed it for weeks. William advised caution but supported whatever decision we made. Our therapist helped us think through what reconciliation might look like if we chose it, and what boundaries would need to remain in place regardless. In the end, we chose to meet with her in a public place, with clear limitations. One conversation, to hear what she had to say, with no promises about future contact. She looked different, older, more serious, less of the performative charm that had always made her feel slightly artificial to me. Her apology was specific and detailed. She acknowledged the timing, the premeditation, the violation of trust. She talked about the counseling she'd received, the patterns of thinking she'd had to confront, the ways she'd learned to take responsibility for her own life instead of resenting other people's success. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said near the end of our conversation, "and I don't expect to be part of your life again. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and why it was unforgivable, and that I'm working to become someone who would never make those choices again." I believed her, or at least I believed that she believed what she was saying. But belief and trust are different things, and trust has to be earned over time through consistent actions, not rebuilt through a single conversation. We thanked her for the apology, wished her well in her continued recovery, and left it at that. No promises of future contact, no false declarations that everything was forgiven and forgotten. Just acknowledgement that we'd both grown into different people than we'd been before, and that sometimes growing apart is the healthiest option. Olivia is 4 years old now, bright and curious and completely unaware that her nursery was ever anything other than the beautiful, peaceful room where she learned to sleep through the night. She calls William Grandpa Will and helps him tend the garden at his house, where we still have dinner every Sunday. Sometimes I think about the version of this story where I absorbed Jenna's behavior, where I made excuses for her choices, where I prioritized keeping the peace over protecting my family. That version ends with years of walking on eggshells, with Olivia growing up in a house where boundaries don't matter and consequences don't exist, with Marcus and me constantly managing other people's emotions instead of building our own life together. Instead, we have this: a strong marriage, a secure home, a daughter who's learning that love includes accountability, and the knowledge that we can rebuild after betrayal without sacrificing our values or our safety. The nursery walls are sage green again, exactly the same shade we chose originally. But now they also hold the story of what we fought to protect, what we chose to rebuild, and what we learned about the difference between family that hurts you and family that helps you heal. And every night when I put Olivia to bed in her restored crib, under her mobile of flying birds, I'm grateful for the choice we made to stand firm when it mattered most. Not revenge, just boundaries. Not punishment, just consequences. Not perfection, just the courage to protect what we'd built together. That, it turns out, was enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.